Hey guys, tonight we're heading into a place where the air bites your cheeks. The sky feels so close, it could scratch you, and ice whispers secrets older than your entire family tree. You're not in some cozy cabin. Oh no, you're trudging high into the Alps, boots sinking into crusty snow, the cold slicing straight through your jacket like it has a personal grudge. Somewhere under your feet lies a man who's been waiting more than 5,000 years to be found. He's not exactly the kind of neighbor you want to stumble across on a hike, unless you've always dreamed of sharing trail mix with a mummified stranger. You probably won't survive this climb, by the way. Altitude sickness, icy winds, and, oh yeah, avalanches are very much a thing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing when and where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind stings your ears, a restless whining whistle that seems to push you forward even as your legs drag. You picture yourself as some anonymous hiker in 1991, boots crunching on the hardened surface of a shrinking glacier. Down below, the valleys roll out in soft greens and grays. But up here, everything is white, gray, and sharp as a blade. The Italian-Austrian border runs right across this icy ridge. Though back then, nobody trudging through the slush knew they were about to blur history along with geography. Your eyes snag on something strange. At first, it looks like a twisted root poking through the ice, or maybe the brown scrap of a discarded rucksack. But no tree can grow this high, and no modern climber carries leather like that. You crouch, knees creaking against the frozen ground, and brush snow away with gloved fingers. The shape hardens into skin, leathery and brown, stretched across bone. You jerk back, breath fogging out in a startled cloud. You've just uncovered Ötzi. At first, nobody realizes this isn't just a frozen body from last winter. The Alps are littered with tragedies, lost mountaineers, hunters who never came back, wanderers swallowed by storms. But here, the leather feels different, the gear scattered around the body, oddly ancient. A copper axe lies nearby, its greenish patina shimmering through the frost. And copper? That doesn't belong to any 20th century mountaineer. The body lies curled, half buried in ice, as if he's resting after a long, exhausting climb. His skin is parchment thin, tightened by millennia of cold storage. You lean in closer, if you're brave, and notice the details. The shaggy remnants of hair still clinging to his skull, a beard frozen in time, skin etched with faint dark lines that almost look like tattoos. You might shiver, not only from the wind, but from the eerie sense that this man still holds onto a story, one no modern diary ever recorded. Mainstream fact first. Scientists later confirmed Ötzi is over 5,000 years old, dating to about 3300 BCE, older than the Egyptian pyramids, older than Stonehenge, practically an elder statesman of humanity. This means you're peering not just at a corpse, but at the oldest natural human mummy ever found in Europe. A time capsule with bones, blood and belongings intact. Here's the quirky tidbit. When he was first spotted, local authorities thought he might just be a hiker from the 1940s, maybe a casualty of World War II, left behind on the ridge. Imagine the disappointment when they tried yanking him out with ski poles and axes, not realizing they were hacking at a priceless archaeological treasure. Someone even snapped a few vacation-style photos. Grinning tourists with sunglasses standing over a guy who'd been lying there since before the alphabet was invented. But historians still argue whether his discovery was pure chance or practically destined. The glacier had to melt just enough, at just the right season, to reveal his body, but not destroy it. If climate and timing had shifted even slightly, Ötzi might still be locked away. Or worse, crushed by the restless ice forever. Fate or fluke? That's still up for debate. You imagine kneeling closer, the wind rattling loose rocks around you, as that leathery hand reaches out of the ice like a warning. His fingernails are long gone, but the curve of his knuckles suggests motion, like he was grasping for something, maybe even clawing the snow in his final moments. The ice around his torso has shrunk into a shallow coffin, clear enough that you can glimpse his ribs beneath the stretched skin. It's both grotesque and mesmerizing. Your breath slows, sinking with the hush of the glacier. The body doesn't answer, of course. It's not that kind of ghost story. But the silence feels loaded, as though he's daring you to piece together the puzzle of how he came to rest here. Was it the cold that took him? Or something darker? A chase, an ambush. Blood spilled across the stones before snow erased it. The truth is, you don't yet know. All you have is this moment, a hiker staring at an ancient man, rediscovered in the frozen heights of the Alps. The mystery has cracked open, and for the next many hours, you'll be walking alongside him, retracing his steps, touching the edges of his story. The air chills deeper, settling like a blanket of silence over your shoulders. Somewhere down in the valley, cows graze lazily, bells clinking, completely unaware that history just got flipped upside down a few hundred meters above their pastures. Up here, though, you stand with Ötzi, the Iceman, the man who refused to vanish. The moment you brush away the frost and realize Ötzi isn't just another unlucky mountaineer, your mind jumps backward. You can't help it. 1 second you're crouched in the 1991 chill. The next, you're sliding straight into his world. 3300 BCE, the Copper Age. No highways, no ski poles, no neon jackets. Just raw earth, cold winds, and a man trudging through stone and snow, every muscle aching with the effort of hauling his weary body uphill. Picture it. Ötzi's boots crunch against scree, thin soles flexing with every sharp rock. The leather has been patched more times than you'd like to count. His shoes aren't brand new Nikes, but woven straw, deerskin, and fur stuffed with grass for warmth. Each step squelches slightly as meltwater sneaks through the seams. And you're walking right behind him, able to see the sag of his shoulders, the way his head drops lower with every incline. He's not just strolling, he's limping, grimacing, forcing himself forward as though the mountain itself is chasing him. The sun is a weak, silvery blur above, but the air is thin and cold. You breathe hard, matching him step for step, until your chest burns like you've swallowed cinders. He knows these passes. Hunters and herders have moved through them for centuries, but this climb feels different. There's an urgency to it, as though he isn't just traveling, he's escaping. Historians still argue whether Ötzi was fleeing enemies, traveling to trade, or simply migrating with the season. Was he part of a clan war, a political scuffle, or was he just in the wrong place at the wrong time? What you do know is that his steps, slow as they seem, are the last he'll ever take alive. His gear rattles softly as he climbs. A bow leans against his shoulder, unfinished arrows in a quiver at his back, a copper axe hanging at his belt. That axe isn't just any tool, it's practically a neon sign, screaming, "I'm important." Copper was rare and expensive in his day, and carrying such a blade meant you were somebody, or at least somebody worth robbing. You wonder if its gleam made him a target long before the mountain swallowed him. Mainstream fact: his body shows signs of multiple injuries, an arrow wound in his back, a fresh cut on his hand, bruising around his ribs. These didn't all come from a simple fall. They suggest conflict, maybe a fight that spilled into the high passes. Imagine the tension that drove him upward, a chase, a betrayal, maybe even his last desperate gamble to outpace men who wanted him gone. And here's the quirky tidbit. Analysis of pollen in his gut shows he'd recently been down in the warmer valleys, likely eating a full meal before climbing into the thin air, meaning he wasn't starving and he wasn't lost. He chose to come up here. Imagine finishing a nice platter of ibex meat and einkorn bread, then deciding to hike into what is basically Europe's freezer chest. If that's not determination or desperation, I don't know what is. The slope steepens, and his breath rasps loud enough that you can hear it above the wind. His left hand flexes around his bow, fingers raw from use, knuckles stiff. He pauses on a ridge, looking back down the way he came, scanning for movement. For a moment his face tightens, eyes narrowing, as though expecting to see figures in the snow behind him. You look too, but the valley is quiet, just shadows crawling slowly across the whiteness. Still, the tension doesn't lift from his shoulders. He adjusts his pack, wipes his nose with the back of his hand, and pushes onward. You can almost feel his body faltering, his steps stuttering. The cut on his hand stings with every grip. Maybe it came from a blade, maybe from defending himself against a sudden blow. Whatever the cause, the blood stains his grip, dark against the wood of his bow. The path narrows, forcing him along a jagged edge where loose stones tumble into the void. The Alps here are merciless, slopes that seem to stretch into forever, cliffs where the wrong step means oblivion. And still he goes, slower now, pausing more often, as if his body is betraying him, step by step. You think about your own hiking trips, about how you complain when your sneakers get damp or your phone battery dies. Try doing it in animal skins, wounded, with someone maybe chasing you. Suddenly, your camping misadventures don't look so bad. He climbs until the world flattens into a saddle ridge, a shallow pass between peaks. The wind slams into him, almost knocking him sideways. But here, he finally stops. He lowers himself under the stones, chest heaving, eyes half shut. The ground beneath him is rough, but he presses himself against it anyway, like the earth itself might hide him. His last steps alive have carried him to this lonely, wind-swept corner of the world. And here, he will meet his end. You crouch nearby, watching him sink down, not knowing if he'll rise again. His face is pale, lips cracked from wind, hair tangled into a mat. He leans the copper axe against a rock, sets his bow beside him. It looks almost like he's preparing a camp, but there's no firewood, no tent, no hope. Only exhaustion, only fear simmering beneath his skin. Historians still debate whether he collapsed here by chance or whether his enemies finally caught him in this pass. Some say he was struck while resting, others argue he was ambushed mid-stride. Either way, the simple fact is this: the steps you've just walked with him are his last. The mountains take the rest. The silence presses down, vast and eternal. The Alps don't care who you are or what copper axe you carry. And Ötzi, 5,000 years ago, learns that truth the hardest way possible, one heavy step at a time, until his feet finally stop moving. Ötzi sits slumped against the rocks, breath shallow, hands rough and trembling. From this stillness, your eyes drift over him, because before we talk about wounds and arrows and copper axes, you can't help noticing what he's wearing. Clothes, after all, are the first line of defense in a world where the weather wants you dead before nightfall. And Ötzi? He's wrapped in a prehistoric patchwork masterpiece, a wardrobe stitched together, not for style points, but for pure survival. His outfit is strange, even unsettling. At first glance, it looks like he raided a taxidermy shop and glued whatever bits he could find into a wearable puzzle. But lean closer, and you realize this is genius. Every fiber, every hide, every stitch chosen with intention. You may laugh at the fact that your winter jacket cost $300 and brags about breathable, waterproof membranes. Well, his gear got him up to 3,200 meters in the Alps with nothing but stone tools. Try flexing that in a Patagonia catalog. Start from the ground up. His shoes are little miracles. Think moccasins, but built with an engineer's mind. The soles are bearskin, tough and gripping, perfect for rocky trails. The uppers are deerskin, softer and flexible. Inside, a netting of bark fiber cradles tufts of dry grass, functioning like prehistoric socks. You slip your foot into that layered cocoon, and suddenly your toes aren't blue icicles anymore. They're warm, cushioned, and shockingly dry. Mainstream fact. Modern shoemakers who've replicated them say they're better suited for long-distance hiking than some commercial boots today. A 5,000-year-old flex. Then there are his leggings. Strips of goat hide stitched together with animal sinew. They hug his legs in panels, not unlike skinny jeans, except these won't win him any runway points. They're practical, each patch aligned so the fur points downward, shedding rain and snow. Instead of soaking it up, you brush your fingers along one seam and realize the stitching is precise, careful, like the work of someone who spent their life sewing clothes to endure the mountain's tantrums. Above that, his tunic, woven from grasses, rough but insulating. Over it, a coat of patchworked hides, pieced together like a quilt. Historians still argue whether this cloak was carefully designed or just hastily repaired over and over until it resembled a fur jigsaw puzzle. Some patches come from goats, others from sheep, maybe even wild deer. The mix makes him look like he's wearing a mosaic of animals, each square a story of a hunt or a trade. Here's the quirky tidbit. One test revealed his coat was stitched together using threads spun from domesticated cow intestines. Yes, cow guts. Next time you wrinkle your nose at polyester, just remember, our guy here was literally wearing bovine plumbing on his shoulders. And it worked. Practical? Absolutely. Fashion forward? Not unless Milan decides to do a Copper Age couture season. And then there's his headgear, a cap made from brown bear fur, thick and warm, complete with a chin strap to keep it snug in howling winds. Imagine a bear pelt bonnet that ties neatly under your jaw. It's equal parts terrifying and cozy. He might have looked like a mountain shaman, or just the ultimate trendsetter in the category of don't freeze to death. Strapped around his waist, you notice a belt, not leather, but woven plant fiber. From it dangles a pouch, his everyday carry. Inside, a small scraper, a drill, flint for striking fire. All of it bundled neatly in an animal hide bag, the ancient equivalent of what you might carry in your pocket, or a multi-tool on your keychain. Imagine Ötzi patting the pouch, like you pat your jeans pocket, making sure your phone's still there. Same impulse, different millennium. Historians still debate whether he dressed himself for this particular climb, or whether he was already wearing his everyday outfit when he fled into the mountains. Was he running so suddenly that he didn't have time to prepare? Or did he deliberately layer himself for an extended trek? Some experts argue his shoes, remarkable as they are, don't look brand new. Were they mid-repair? Had he rushed before finishing? His leggings, too, show signs of hasty stitching, as though he, or someone close to him, patched them in a hurry. That debate, planned journey, or desperate escape lingers in every seam. You crouch closer, listening to the whisper of hides rubbing in the wind. Imagine trudging through slush in that gear, your own sweat steaming beneath fur, while snowflakes cling stubbornly to your hood. For a fleeting second, you feel the strange comfort of his clothes, the snug fur at your ankles, the cushion of grass under your heels, the heavy warmth of his cloak. You're dressed like a man who knew exactly how to wage war against winter. And yet, it wasn't enough. Not enough to stop blood loss. Not enough to guard against betrayal. Not enough to keep him alive when the arrow found his back. His clothes, for all their ingenuity, are relics of both triumph and tragedy, proof that he mastered survival. But also that survival sometimes slips through even the cleverest hands. Snow whips around the ridge. You blink, and the vision blurs, as though the hides and furs are dissolving back into brown, leathery remnants. 5,000 years later, they're fragile scraps tucked under museum glass, forever frozen in place. But here, in this moment, Ötzi's patchwork survival suit creaks and breathes with him, as alive as the man himself. Ötzi's cloak rustles in the wind, and your eyes slide past the seams of fur to the other things he carried, the objects that speak even louder than his patchwork clothes. Because if the garments were his shield against the cold, the tools slung at his side were his teeth and claws. They tell you this wasn't just some weary wanderer, staggering into the Alps. This was a hunter, a fighter, a craftsman, carrying pieces of his world up the slope with him. And each item whispers about his life, his skills, and maybe even his death. You start with the axe. Oh yes, that axe. The one archaeologists practically fainted over when they first spotted its greenish gleam in the ice. At first glance, it's small, about the size of a hatchet, but the head? Solid copper, not stone. That's like bumping into someone in the Stone Age and finding them scrolling on an iPad. Mainstream fact, metallurgy in 3300 BCE was cutting-edge stuff. Rare and expensive. A copper axe wasn't just a tool, it was a statement. Only a man of status, or someone tied to trade networks stretching miles across the Alps, could have gotten his hands on one. It was power in physical form, shiny, heavy, and sharp enough to bite through wood, bone, or the unlucky skull of an enemy. And here's the quirky tidbit. The handle of that axe, made of yew wood, was carefully crafted and still lashed tight with strips of leather after 5 millennia. Imagine your modern tools surviving 5,000 years without rusting into dust. Some experiments show that the axe could split logs more efficiently than iron blades made millennia later. In other words, Ötzi wasn't lugging around a relic. He had the sports car of axes. And the kicker, when scientists tested the copper, they found it likely came from southern Tuscany. That's hundreds of miles away, which means this little axe was also a passport, proof of trade routes snaking across prehistoric Europe. Next, your gaze drifts to his bow. It's unfinished, a long stave of yew wood, nearly 2 meters tall, taller than Ötzi himself. Carved, smooth, but not yet strung, almost like he had to abandon the project halfway through. Did he plan to string it once he reached safety? Did he run out of time? Historians still argue whether he was in the process of upgrading his hunting gear, or whether the unfinished bow hints at a life interrupted. Either way, he carried it with him, perhaps clinging to the hope that he'd get a chance to finish it before whatever danger was snapping at his heels finally caught up. And then the arrows. His quiver, sewn from deer hide, holds 14 shafts, but only 2 are complete. The others? Roughly shaped sticks, blanks, waiting to be fletched and tipped. You lift one, feeling the smooth weight in your palm. The finished arrows carry flint heads, sharp and lethal, their feathered tails aligned with precise geometry. The unfinished ones are bare, silent testimony to plans cut short. It's like flipping through someone's half-written notebook. You sense the story was supposed to go on, but the ending came too fast. His dagger catches your eye next. Small, barely the size of a kitchen paring knife, with a flint blade not much longer than your finger. At first, you might scoff. What's he going to do with this? Cut apples? But look closer. The blade is razor sharp, its handle of ash wood worn from use. The sheath carefully stitched to hold it snug. It's a multi-purpose tool, carving wood, skinning hides, cutting meat. It may look humble compared to the copper axe, but this little blade probably worked harder than any other piece of his arsenal. And tucked inside his pouch, a fire-starting kit, bits of flint, pyrite, and dried fungus, known as tinder fungus. With a sharp strike, he could coax sparks into the fungus and blow them into flame. Imagine crouching on a mountainside, wind howling, snow stinging your eyes, and still managing to light a fire with nothing but rock and mushroom. That's prehistoric wizardry. Historians still debate whether Ötzi was more hunter or warrior. Did he carry these tools to provide for his clan? Meat, hides, bones. Or were they weapons he relied on during conflict? The evidence of his wounds suggests he wasn't just a peaceful shepherd, climbing for pasture land. Maybe these tools doubled as his insurance policy. Protection against human predators, as much as wolves. You kneel in the snow, letting your fingers hover over the collection laid around him like grave goods. Each piece feels personal, like rifling through someone's backpack. The axe gleaming like a trophy, the bow waiting to be strung, the arrows half prepared, frozen in transition, the dagger loyal and practical, the pouch warm with the promise of fire. Together, they paint a picture of a man who wasn't just surviving. He was adapting, planning, fighting, dreaming of tomorrow. And yet, tomorrow never came. All those tools, the result of years of skill and trade, couldn't save him from the arrow that struck between his shoulders. The irony sits heavy. He carried everything he needed to live, and still, he died. Snow drifts across the ridge, dusting his quiver and axe handle. In your mind, you see him reaching for them, fingers fumbling, desperate to defend himself. Maybe he almost raised the bow. Maybe the axe shifted in his grip one last time, but the mountain froze the story before he could finish it, leaving his tools to tell the tale. The wind rattles across the ridge, and you lean closer to Ötzi, not to admire the clever stitching of his coat this time, nor the copper gleam of his axe, but the body itself, his leathery skin, his stretched limbs, his stillness. These are not just remains. They're a map inked with scars, cuts, and markings that whisper his life, his pain, and his end. You don't need paper or parchment. His flesh is the storybook. Every wrinkle and wound a line of text. The first thing that draws your eyes are the dark, faint lines scored across his body. Tattoos, nearly 60 of them. Thin, blackish stripes, dots and crosses burned into his skin with soot and charcoal. They don't form dragons or family crests or hearts with mom scrawled across them. These are simpler, almost clinical, parallel lines etched along his spine, crosses on his ankles, dashes behind his knees. If Ötzi wanted to make a statement, it wasn't for a fashion, mainstream fact. Researchers believe his tattoos may have been therapeutic, an early form of acupuncture or pain relief. Many of the marks correspond to pressure points that modern doctors associate with joint pain or back problems. Imagine that, 5,000 years ago, someone might have been jabbing Ötzi with needles and rubbing soot into the wounds to ease his aching spine. While you're busy popping ibuprofen for your stiff neck, he was out here inventing body art that doubled as physical therapy. And here's the quirky tidbit. Ötzi is the oldest known human to bear tattoos. The world's first inked celebrity, if you will. Long before Polynesian chiefs or modern tattoo parlors with buzzing needles, there was this weary alpine man lying on a stone slope with stripes etched into his skin. Think about it. If you're rocking a tattoo sleeve today, You've got a brother in ink who lived before the pyramids were even a sketch on papyrus. But tattoos are just the start. His body bears wounds that read like a final chapter written in blood. A deep cut slices across his right hand, fresh at the time of death, suggesting close combat. You can picture him grabbing at a blade, warding off an attacker. That hand injury isn't the kind you get chopping vegetables. It's the kind you get when you're trying not to die. Further up, his ribs show signs of bruising. His skull carries evidence of blunt trauma, maybe from a fall, maybe from a fight. And then, the biggest clue, the deadliest inscription of all, the arrow lodged in his back. Just beneath his left shoulder blade, the flint arrowhead pierced into him, severing a major artery. The wound alone would have drained his strength in minutes. The body becomes silent proof of murder. Historians still argue whether that arrow struck him mid-run or after he had collapsed. Was he shot while fleeing? Or was the arrow driven home while he lay already weakened? Some theories even suggest his companions or attackers yanked the shaft free and left the head embedded, either in panic or cruelty. His body can't answer, but it asks the question every time you trace your fingers across that dark puncture in the leathery flesh. But his map isn't only about violence. There are stories of daily life too. Microscopic studies of his fingernails reveal Bo's lines, ridges that indicate bouts of illness. At least 3 times, in the months before his death, Ötzi was laid low by fevers or stress. You imagine him coughing in a smoky hut, sweat on his brow, his people whispering whether he'd recover. And yet he did, until fate called him higher into the mountains. His teeth tell tales as well. They're worn down the stubs, enamel ground away by a lifetime of chewing rough bread made from stone ground grain. Tiny bits of grit from the grindstones lodged in his meals, slowly filing his teeth away like sandpaper. If you've ever complained about a popcorn kernel stuck in your molar, spare a thought for Ötzi, whose entire dental plan was try not to starve. And let's not forget his parasites. Yes, the poor man carried whipworm in his gut. That's right, while hiking the Alps, chased by enemies, clutching his copper axe. He also had to deal with stomach cramps, courtesy of intestinal worms. Honestly, if that's not bad luck, what is? Imagine dragging yourself up a snowy pass with diarrhea brewing. It makes you respect him even more for not just lying down and giving up. Each detail, the tattoos, the wounds, the nails, the teeth, the parasites, layers onto the map of his body, and you start to see him less as a mummy and more as a man. Not a symbol in a museum, but a living person who hurt, who healed, who got sick, who carried secrets on his skin. You step back, the icy wind filling your lungs, and stare at him again. He looks small, curled on the mountain, and yet every inch of him is crowded with meaning. His skin is like parchment where history scribbled its notes. Some words you can read, some are smudged, lost, or debated endlessly by scholars. But together, they make him more alive in death than most people are in life. The body of Ötzi is not just a relic, it's a topographical map of survival, suffering, and finality. And as you trace those lines in your mind, you realize he didn't vanish into the glacier. He became part of it, etched forever in ice and skin. You've studied the tattoos, followed the scars, and felt the weight of his copper axe. But there's one map left inside Ötzi that's stranger, messier, and surprisingly revealing. His stomach. Yes, even after 5,000 years, his last meals clung to him like receipts in a forgotten wallet. And those scraps of food are not just gross trivia. They're clues to his final hours. Almost like a prehistoric time-stamped menu. It took scientists decades to unlock this. At first, when they peered inside him, they couldn't even find his stomach. Organs had shriveled, shifted, folded in on themselves. For years, they thought his last meal was just a smear of grain residue in his intestines. Then, thanks to modern CT scans, they realized his stomach had simply shifted higher under his ribs, like a lost suitcase, tucked where no one expected. And when they opened it, jackpot. Mainstream fact. Ötzi's last known meal was a hearty plate of ibex meat, red deer, einkorn wheat bread, and traces of herbs. Yes, 5,000 years ago, this guy had himself a proper feast before his doomed mountain climb. Imagine grilled goat-like ibex, a chunk of venison, and some rough sourdough-style bread to wash it down. That's not a hiker's emergency snack. That's a banquet compared to what you'd expect up in the thin air of the Alps. And here's the quirky tidbit. Mixed in with his meat and bread were fragments of bracken fern, a toxic plant. Did he nibble it as medicine? Maybe to fight off parasites? Or did some leaf just slip into the meal like an accidental garnish? Historians still argue whether he poisoned himself slightly by accident or whether bracken was part of his home remedy kit. Picture yourself chewing bitter fern to kill worms in your gut. Suddenly, that chalky pink stomach medicine on your bathroom shelf doesn't seem so bad. His stomach also tells you something about timing. The food wasn't fully digested, meaning he'd eaten not long before his death. Maybe within an hour or two. You can almost see him wiping grease from his fingers, licking crumbs from his lips, shouldering his gear, and trudging upward, full-bellied but unaware that an arrow was waiting for him. Pause for a moment. Isn't that eerie? The idea that his very last act before dying was sitting somewhere, maybe with company, maybe alone, chewing roasted ibex, maybe tearing bread with his teeth, maybe savoring the herbs. One final comfort before chaos. You wonder, who prepared that meal? Did he cook it himself, squatting by a fire? Or did someone else hand him the food? Someone who knew he wouldn't be coming back. That's the unsettling part. The Last Supper is always a shared act, even if unspoken. Historians still debate the setting of this meal. Was it in a valley farmhouse, among kin and heart smoke, with clay bowls and laughter? Or was it a rough campfire on the slope, him gnawing venison while snowflakes hissed on hot stones? Each version changes the story, a cozy send-off, or a desperate refueling in flight. The stomach doesn't answer. It just holds the food, and there's more. Fat layers in the meat suggest it was autumn or spring, when ibex carried extra stores for the season. The bread points to domesticated farming, not just hunting. This was a man of two worlds, wild prey and cultivated grain. The line between savage hunter and settled farmer blurred in his belly. He wasn't just a caveman gnawing raw marrow. He was a man connected to trade, agriculture, and knowledge of herbs. His gut is proof that culture had already left fingerprints deep inside his body. You lean closer, imagining the tastes. The gamey tang of ibex fat, salty and rich. The chew of deer meat, roasted but still tough between the teeth. The rough texture of bread baked on stone. Little bits of grit crunching against enamel. The bitterness of fern leaf, sharp at the edges of the tongue. It's a dinner both humble and heroic. Food that could fuel you up a mountain. Food that tasted of survival. Food that reminded you of home. And still, the cruel twist. None of it saved him. The calories sat heavy in his stomach, energy waiting to be burned. And then death froze it in place, forever. He died full, not empty. His body became a pantry of secrets, holding on to flavors that no one had tasted in 5,000 years. Until a lab microscope revealed them again. For a moment, you feel his presence differently. Not just a mummy with tattoos and wounds, but a man who sat down to eat, whose hunger and satisfaction echo into yours. The way your own stomach rumbles as you imagine the meat sizzling in firelight. The way you suddenly want bread, hot and thick, even as you realize his meal was also his epitaph. Ötzi's stomach is a reminder that death interrupts life in the middle of ordinary things. 1 minute you're eating, the next you're running, the next you're frozen in ice, your last bites still waiting to digest. And 5 millennia later, strangers peer into your belly, like detectives reading an unfinished diary. You step back, the mountain wind clawing at your cheeks, and glance again at the ridge where he lies. The last meal lingers, an invisible scent, a memory of smoke and fat and bitter fern. And you realize, sometimes the stomach tells the story better than the heart. You followed Ötzi through his tools, his tattoos, his last meal. But now comes the part that feels like the script of a prehistoric crime thriller. Because no matter how much bread and ibex meat he ate, no matter how carefully he stitched his leggings, he didn't just wander into the glacier and collapse. No, Ötzi died violently. The Alps didn't take him by accident. Someone did. It wasn't obvious at first. For years after his discovery, the working theory was simple. Poor guy got caught in a snowstorm and froze. Tragic, but tidy. Then came 2001. A team of radiologists took another look at his chest using high-resolution scans. And there it was, lodged deep in his left shoulder blade. The arrowhead, the smoking gun of the Copper Age. Mainstream fact, Ötzi was shot in the back with a flint-tipped arrow. The shaft snapped off or was removed, but the stone tip remained buried in bone. That wound wasn't survivable. It pierced an artery near the shoulder, meaning he would have bled out within minutes. Suddenly, the mountain wasn't just the scene of an accident. It was the scene of a murder. Now, quirky detail. The arrowhead had been in him for over 5,000 years, and nobody noticed until those scans. Imagine being the world's most studied mummy, handled, thawed, scanned, dissected, probed for decades, and only then does someone say, guys, he's got an arrow in him. It's like realizing Sherlock Holmes missed the knife still stuck in the body. That's how hard the Alps hid their secret. But here's the kicker. That wasn't his only wound. His right hand bore a deep cut, almost like a defensive slash from a blade. His skull had trauma too, evidence of a blow. Layer these injuries together, And you don't see a man who stumbled in the snow. You see a man ambushed, chased, and finished off. This wasn't a quiet death. This was pursuit, struggle, blood. Historians are still locked in debate about what exactly happened. Was it a clan feud? A robbery gone wrong? Maybe even a political assassination in some village dispute we'll never hear the gossip about. One camp argues that Ötzi was fleeing, arrow shot from a distance, then collapsing on the ridge as blood filled his chest. Another group says he might have been struck first in close combat, then shot later to finish him. Either way, it's brutal. Let's set the scene, because you can almost feel it. Picture Ötzi on that final climb, the air thinning, his legs heavy, his belly full but his nerves frayed. He pauses, maybe to catch breath, maybe to scan the slopes. Behind him, shadows, men, an enemy from his valley, a rival hunter. They follow, waiting for the right angle. He grips his axe, heartbeat pounding, but he can't outrun an arrow. The shot flies, cracks into his back, fire ripping through his shoulder. He stumbles forward, gasping. The copper axe falls to the ground, and then the cold finishes the job. He doesn't make it down. His body slumps into the stone, blood soaking into ice that will harden and preserve it like glass. His killers? They vanish. Did they even realize the Alps would guard their crime scene for 5 millennia? Probably not. They just left him there, maybe taking nothing, maybe in too much of a rush to risk the weather. Maybe they thought the mountain would erase him, but the mountain remembered. And this is where scholars split hairs. One theory says he was attacked by outsiders, raiders, or rivals. Another says the killer might have been someone close to him, a clanmate, or even kin. Why? Because Ötzi still had valuables, that prized copper axe, a blade worth more than many lives. If it had been a robbery, surely they'd have taken it. But they didn't, which means the motive wasn't greed. It was personal. Revenge, betrayal, maybe even politics in a world without written laws. Think about that for a moment. One of the oldest cold cases in history, and the murderer got away with it. The Alps froze the victim, but not the truth. All we're left with are theories, fragments, and the chilling reality that Ötzi's final breaths were spent bleeding on stone while the wind whipped around him. Close your eyes, and you can almost feel it. The echo of footsteps on ice, the thrum of a bowstring, the sting of betrayal sharper than the arrowhead itself. Ambush in the Alps, a story 5,000 years old, but still raw, still unresolved. You followed Ötzi up the glacier and seen the arrowhead in his back. But here's the next great mystery. Who was with him on that last climb? Because if you've been picturing him as a lone wanderer, trudging through snow like some Copper Age introvert, the evidence doesn't quite agree. See, Ötzi didn't just materialize on the mountain. He had a life down in the valleys. Neighbors, kin, hunting partners, rivals, and clues in his story hint that he wasn't entirely alone during those final days. The question is, were those figures companions helping him, or enemies hunting him? Mainstream fact first. Analysis of his gear suggests repair and upkeep that doesn't quite match the time he had left. His arrows, for example, tell a strange story. Some were carefully fletched, feathers lined up with precision, the work of a skilled hand. Others, half finished, shafts uncut, tips not sharpened. Why carry half-made arrows unless you are planning to finish them later, or unless someone else was meant to? Archaeologists think he may have been in the middle of restocking his quiver with the help of others. That's a snapshot of community, not isolation. Quirky detail. Traces of blood from 4 different individuals were found on his kit. Imagine that. His quiver, dagger, and coat each had different genetic fingerprints on them. This wasn't just his blood painting the scene. It was other people's. A messy mosaic of battle, aid, or both. It's the prehistoric version of finding 4 sets of fingerprints on a single crime scene. Now, here comes the debate that keeps scholars up at night. One camp says Ötzi wasn't alone when he died. He had allies, maybe hunting companions or kinsmen who stood by him in some violent clash. He could have fought alongside them, bloodied their enemies, then retreated into the mountains when things went south. They argue that those 4 blood traces might be the enemies he struck, carried into the Alps like trophies of a desperate last stand. But another camp has a darker reading. What if those bloodstains weren't proof of comrades, but of attackers? What if those companions weren't friends at all, but enemies who turned on him? His hand wound suggests close combat, a blade flashing against his palm, maybe while grappling for control. Did he fight off an ambush with his own dagger? Did someone strike him, and then someone else fire the arrow that dropped him? In that version, the companions are exactly who he had to fear. Let's play both scenes in your head. Scenario 1. Companions. Ötzi and a handful of hunters are on the run after a bloody skirmish. They've cut, fought, maybe even killed. Some of their own bleed out on the mountain path. The survivors press upward, desperate to escape pursuit. But Ötzi falters. He's wounded, slowing them down. They try to help, maybe even bind his wounds. But in the chaos, he collapses. And when the snow thickens, they have no choice but to leave him behind. They live. He doesn't. Tragic, but loyal until the end. Scenario 2. Enemies. He's not with friends at all. He's being stalked. The blood on his dagger? That's someone he slashed as they closed in. The blood on his coat? Someone who grappled him, trying to wrestle him down. And the arrow? That's the finishing stroke. In this tale, Ötzi doesn't die abandoned. He dies hunted, surrounded, and finally silenced. And here's the real kicker. No one can say for sure. His body was preserved, but not the full script of that day. We're left with shadows on the ice, a few drops of DNA, and a copper axe that gleams like a question mark. Was he betrayed by those closest to him? Or did he fall because he was loyal to companions who fought and fell beside him? Close your eyes and picture the silence after it ended. Snow drifting over footprints. Blood already freezing into dark stains. The Alps erasing everything but Ötzi's body, locked in its icy shrine. Companions or enemies, we'll never know which were at his side when he drew his last breath. But we do know this. No one walks into history alone. You hover now in that silent alpine cradle, where the winds scrape across stone and snow the way fingers brush an ancient harp. You remember Ötzi, lying there, curled slightly, face toward eternity, skin leathery and darkened by 5,000 years of alpine cold. But here's the strange thing. Death wasn't the end of his journey. His body became a kind of frozen passport to the afterlife. Though not in the religious sense, his people probably imagined. Instead, the mountains themselves claimed him, folding him into an afterlife, written in ice rather than myth. You picture him, his last exhale turning brittle in the thin air, his body cooling as the sun dropped behind the jagged ridges. A storm gathered, then layers of snow drifted silently down, tucking him in like a child in a bed of white. Each flake, delicate, carried a promise that no scavenger would pick at him, no spring flood would sweep him away, no fire would burn him to ash. In a strange twist, nature gave him the perfect burial. You know those modern people who pay for cryogenic freezing, hoping science will thaw them out later? Well, Ötzi got the deluxe package long before cryopods were trendy, and he didn't even have to sign paperwork. The mainstream fact here, the reason Ötzi survived so perfectly is because the glacier kept him sealed in a natural deep freeze for over 5,000 years. Every season, snow piled on snow, pressing down until he was locked beneath ice, so thick it became a time capsule. His clothes, his tools, even the food in his stomach, all remained preserved, waiting for future eyes to rediscover them. But here's a quirky tidbit that doesn't quite fit the solemn mood. When researchers first examined his body, they assumed he was a modern hiker who had gotten lost in recent decades. Why? His skin was so well preserved, and his leather gear so intact that they thought maybe he died in the 1950s. Imagine hiking up the mountain and stumbling on this poor old mountaineer, only to later find out, oh, no big deal. He's basically 5,000 years older than the pyramids. You almost expect someone in the 1990s Discovery team to say, better call his next of kin, before realizing his family tree ended millennia ago. And here comes the scholarly debate, the one that still hangs in the alpine air. How did his body remain exposed for just long enough to be found, without ever being destroyed by weather? Some argue that Ötzi's body had been buried in ice almost continuously since death, with only brief thaws that exposed him right before hikers stumbled upon him in 1991. Others believe shifting glacial ice carried him slowly, repositioning him over centuries before spitting him out just in time for modern humans to notice. It's as if the mountains themselves decided when to release their secret. Historians still argue whether this was pure accident or some odd rhythm of climate that worked in his favor. You let your eyes wander over this frozen afterlife. The rocks around him held their breath for millennia. The lichen grew, died, grew again, whispering centuries. And underneath, Ötzi slept, untouched by worms or decay. His afterlife wasn't golden palaces or ethereal skies. It was stillness, eternal stillness, until humans intruded with cameras, scalpels, and curiosity. You can almost hear him sigh, 5,000 years late. Really? You guys couldn't let me nap a little longer? You trace his outline in your mind. Bent arm, tattoos hidden beneath layers of shrunken skin, tools resting close like guardians in the snow. His people might have pictured a spirit road where hunters followed reindeer into the beyond. Instead, his journey became data points in textbooks, CT scans glowing on computer monitors, documentaries streaming late at night. A new kind of immortality. Not the immortality of myth, but of memory, of science, of endless fascination. You settle deeper into the hush. That's the thing about Ötzi's frozen afterlife. It's not only his story, it's a mirror. You wonder, if you were left here, would the mountains cradle you too? Would some far future people poke at your sneakers, your phone, your crumbs of granola bar, trying to read meaning into them? The thought is both unsettling and oddly comforting. The night wind rattles against the imaginary tent around you, snow tapping like small fingers. And Ötzi rests, still preserved, still waiting, his frozen afterlife stretching on, reminding you that sometimes the earth itself is the most faithful gravekeeper. You step back from the glacier, letting the mountain wind whip past your ears. And suddenly, you're not just thinking about Ötzi in his frozen stillness. You're seeing him through modern eyes. Because here's the thing, for over 5,000 years, nobody knew him. Not a soul. And then, in 1991, hikers stumbled upon him, and the world blinked awake, rubbing its eyes, staring at a body that time forgot. Mainstream fact first, Ötzi's discovery marked one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century. Suddenly, scientists, historians, and even forensic experts had a real human from the Copper Age to study. Not bones, not cave paintings, not fragments of pottery. They could measure, scan, and analyze him. Carbon dating, CT scans, DNA sequencing, everything except ask him to narrate his story himself. Modern eyes opened, and a man frozen in ice became a full-fledged person again. Quirky detail. His discovery initially caused a bizarre legal tug-of-war. Italy and Austria argued over who had rights to this 5,000-year-old hiker. Meanwhile, tourists crowded the small alpine paths, posing for selfies with the glacier, completely unaware they were near the world's oldest murder scene. Imagine snapping a photo with Ötzi in the background. Hey look, glacier selfie. And 5 millennia of history is just casually smiling back at you. But here's the deeper fascination. Scientists didn't just see a frozen corpse. They saw a time capsule of human life. His clothes told stories of fashion and survival. His tools revealed skills and trade networks. His stomach gave a menu from the past. And his tattoos whispered ancient therapy practices. Every detail became a mirror of everyday life in Europe, 3300 BCE. You could track diet, parasites, injuries, technology, even social structures. Modern eyes didn't just see a mummy. They saw a window into the Copper Age itself. Historians still argue about what Ötzi tells us regarding social complexity at the time. Was he a common hunter? Or did his prized copper axe signal elite status? Did his tattoos mark him as a healer or someone suffering chronic pain? Modern analysis has reopened debates about early European communities, whether they were small bands of wandering hunters or organized groups with trade, medicine, and conflict. Ötzi's body, preserved in ice, has become a catalyst for rewriting ancient history. You notice the tiniest details, the things that jump out only when you stare for hours. His fingernails reveal health fluctuations. His stomach contents map seasonal eating. Even the wear on his shoes and leggings tells you he walked long distances, not idly wandering. Modern eyes scrutinize each fiber, each wound, each hair. as if reading the margins of a manuscript forgotten for millennia. And here's the quirky, slightly unsettling truth. Scientists have reconstructed his face multiple times using CT scans and 3D modeling. He has brown hair, a weathered face, piercing eyes, what you might imagine for a rugged alpine wanderer. Some reconstructions are so lifelike, you feel as if he might blink at you. Like the glacier didn't just preserve flesh, it preserved intent, awareness, a frozen gaze into the modern world. But modern eyes don't just gaze, they interpret. Forensic testing revealed his blood type, genetic predispositions, lactose intolerance, even traces of certain bacteria and parasites. You can almost hear the DNA whisper, I am him. I'm alive in fragments, in code, in every scientist's microscope. Modern technology turns him from artifact into someone you could, theoretically, diagnose and study as if he were still alive. The scholars still debate how much we can truly know. Does studying his remains make him an individual, or is he now a collection of data points, a specimen? Is he a person or a case study? Your eyes, modern and human, are caught between reverence and curiosity, wondering whether the thrill of discovery overshadows the tragedy of his life and death. You step away, letting the ice glitter in your peripheral vision. Modern eyes have opened, yes, but they cannot rewrite his story entirely. They can only illuminate fragments. A man with a copper axe, tattoos etched into his skin, meals still digesting, wounds still bleeding silently in the mind's eye. And in doing so, they make you pause, aware that seeing him is different from truly knowing him. Even after 5 millennia, you hover over the glacier again, letting your fingers trace imaginary lines on the ice where Ötzi rests, and suddenly it hits you. This is where science truly awakens. Not just a discovery, not just a frozen corpse, but a moment where human curiosity and technology collide with 5,000 years of silence. Modern eyes have opened, yes, but now microscopes, DNA sequencers, and CT scanners begin to speak, and they're louder than you expect. Mainstream fact: Ötzi has been one of the most studied mummies in the world. From the tiniest scrap of tissue to the largest artifact he carried, scientists have applied every possible technology to him. DNA analysis revealed his blood type, O positive, his genetic predisposition to heart disease, lactose intolerance, even traces of the pathogens he carried. His body is practically screaming its secrets, provided we listen carefully enough. And here's the quirky twist. The man harbored a louse infestation, not just a casual tickle. Tiny remnants of lice were trapped in his hair, showing that even the Copper Age was not immune to the annoying little creatures we deal with today. Some researchers joked that the first medicated shampoo could have been a necessity for hunters like him. You picture Ötzi trying to brush through matted hair, scratching at lice, all while running up alpine passes and dodging arrows. Modern science loves these little humanizing details. They make the distant past feel surprisingly intimate, but science awakens in more profound ways. His stomach and intestines revealed the last meal: ibex, red deer, wild grain, and bitter bracken. Traces of pollen helped identify the season, and microscopic analysis of his gut flora provided a snapshot of his microbiome. The earliest example we have? His tools and clothing revealed trade routes spanning hundreds of miles, copper from southern Tuscany, fletched arrows, yew wood. Every object, a thread in the tapestry of a life 5 millennia old. Historians still argue over the interpretation of these findings. Does his copper axe indicate elite status, or was it simply a functional tool available through trade networks? Were his tattoos therapeutic marks or cultural symbols, or both? Science can reveal facts, but the human narrative, his motivations, fears, social standing, remains open to debate. Modern analysis offers astonishing clarity, but never complete certainty. And here's a more playful, yet profound detail. CT scans have allowed researchers to virtually remove layers of Ötzi's clothing and skin, seeing what lies beneath without touching the body. It's like playing a prehistoric video game, where each scan uncovers a hidden level of history. You can follow the arrow lodged in his shoulder, examine tiny cuts on his hands, trace the alignment of tattoos along his spine, all without disturbing a single millimeter of his preserved flesh. His body also revealed old injuries, a healed rib fracture, worn joints, and signs of degenerative disease, showing that life in the Copper Age was brutal, demanding, and unforgiving. And yet, Ötzi had survived decades of it. He was not just a victim, he was a resilient human, navigating mountains, hunting, traveling, and even experimenting with early medicinal practices, like rubbing soot into his tattoos, or eating bracken for intestinal parasites. Every discovery awakens new questions. Why was he carrying unfinished arrows? Who attacked him, and why? Did his community betray him? Or did rivals simply catch him in the wrong place at the wrong time? Science can scan, sequence, and simulate, but it can't answer the emotional, moral, and social questions lurking in his death. And as you watch the data pour in, blood typing, pollen analysis, isotopic studies, you realize something profound. Science doesn't just study him, it resurrects him in pieces, reconstructs a life frozen in ice, and allows you to walk beside him in thought. It transforms mystery into understanding, but never fully erases the shadow of the unknown. You step back from the glacier and imagine Ötzi, standing in the shadow of the mountains, tools in hand, wind biting, thinking of his journey and unaware of the centuries to come. Science awakens not just in labs, but in you, imagining, questioning, marveling, tracing every line of a life preserved so perfectly, it's almost surreal. And yet, despite all the technology, the mountain keeps its final secrets. You crouch again near the glacier, letting the wind tug at your hair, and your eyes land on the copper axe lying next to Ötzi. It's not just a tool, it's a storyteller, a messenger from the past. Heavy, green-tinged, the axe head gleams even in the dim alpine light. And for a moment, you imagine him gripping it, swinging at wood or an attacker, carrying not only a weapon, but a symbol of survival and status. Mainstream fact: the copper axe is made from almost pure copper, carefully smelted and hammered into shape, and its origin traces back to southern Tuscany, hundreds of kilometers away. That's right, Ötzi carried a piece of distant trade across the Alps, evidence of a network connecting communities far beyond his valley. It wasn't just a hunter's tool, It was a passport of status, skill, and connection. Carrying that axe would have announced, even silently, that he was not a nobody. Now for the quirky detail. Microscopic analysis of the axe's handle shows that Ötzi's sweat, skin cells, and even traces of plant fibers from his last meal were embedded in the wood and leather bindings. Imagine this. He didn't just touch it. He left fingerprints 5,000 years old. Modern science can almost feel him through the axe. Some researchers liken it to a prehistoric Snapchat, a tiny, enduring message frozen in copper and wood. And yet, the axe is more than a badge or relic. It's a clue in the puzzle of his death. Scholars still argue whether the axe's presence indicates a peaceful journey or a life interrupted by conflict. Some suggest that its value may have made him a target. Why shoot an arrow into someone with a copper axe? Theories abound: envy, rivalry, clan disputes, or revenge. Whoever struck him might have coveted the axe, but left it behind, suggesting the killing was personal rather than opportunistic. You imagine the scene. He's climbing the ridge, axe strapped to his belt, unfinished arrows jostling in his quiver. The air thins, wind whipping, snow crunching beneath his boots. He pauses, fingers brushing the axe handle. Perhaps he's adjusting the strap, feeling the smooth wood, the cold weight of metal against leather. And then, a shadow, a flash of movement. The arrow flies. The world narrows to pain, and the axe tumbles from his grasp. The very object that symbolizes survival lies abandoned, silent, a witness to betrayal. Even the design of the axe tells a story. Its shape, a broad blade fused seamlessly to the haft, reveals sophisticated metallurgical knowledge. Some researchers argue that such craftsmanship was rare and indicative of elevated social standing. Others suggest that similar axes have been found in less elite contexts, challenging the idea that only high-status individuals wielded metal. Historians still debate whether Ötzi's axe marked him as special or simply as an ordinary hunter, equipped with a remarkable tool. Closer examination shows wear marks from use, splintered wood, scratches on the copper surface, dents along the edge. This wasn't just ceremonial. It cut wood, perhaps stripped hides, maybe even fought in skirmishes. And yet, despite its durability, it could not defend him from that fatal arrow. It's almost poetic. The very emblem of his strength and skill is powerless against a single, precise attack. And here's the unsettling part. Modern analysis of the axe's residues reveals traces of other metals and plant fibers, suggesting it may have been used in multiple regions, carried across valleys, passed through many hands. In a way, it carries ghosts of other people's lives, along with Ötzi's own. Each fingerprint, each scuff, each microscopic particle contributes to the story, turning the axe into a time capsule of interconnected human experience. You stand, letting the wind buffet you, eyes lingering on that green-tinged blade. In its simple form, it holds craftsmanship, culture, and the shadow of betrayal. It's more than a tool. It's a clue, a witness, and a fragment of human history frozen in ice. The axe survived the centuries. Ötzi did not. Yet through it, he speaks across millennia, his story whispering in copper and yew wood. urging you to see the man behind the metal. You lean closer to the snow, imagining that final moment in the Alps, and your gaze fixes on the silent testament lodged in Ötzi's back, the arrow, not just a tool of hunting, but a harbinger of death, frozen in time and ice. You trace its jagged edges in your mind, envisioning the trajectory, the force, the shock of impact, the way it turned his life into history. In an instant, mainstream fact. The arrowhead was made of flint, carefully chipped and shaped into a deadly point. It struck beneath the left shoulder blade, slicing into muscle and severing a major artery. The wound would have bled profusely, making survival almost impossible. Forensic analysis shows that the shaft was likely pulled out or broken, leaving the flint tip embedded in bone, which is why it remained hidden for decades beneath his skin. Here's the quirky detail. The arrow wasn't particularly long or elaborate. It was the Copper Age equivalent of a pocket weapon, small but precise. Experts have noted that it could have been shot from a relatively short distance, suggesting an ambush or a fight in close quarters. Imagine Ötzi suddenly hearing the twang of a bowstring, the whistling arrowhead, and realizing the world had just shifted from a routine hike to life or death chaos. Historians still argue about the timing of the shot. Was he hit while fleeing, running desperately across the ridge with unfinished arrows rattling in his quiver? Or was he immobilized, perhaps already wounded by a blow to the hand or head when the arrow struck? The answer changes the narrative. Either a desperate escape that ended abruptly, or a premeditated strike on a man who could no longer defend himself. Both scenarios are haunting, both plausible. You picture it vividly. The wind hisses around jagged stone, cold, slicing through layers of hide and leather. He stumbles, instinctively grabbing at the arrow, feeling the heat and shock of pain gripping the copper axe that cannot save him. Snow crunches underfoot as he tries to flee, muscles screaming, blood soaking into cloth and ice. The arrow's path tells the story of betrayal, skill, and finality. It's precise, deliberate, a tiny piece of flint that changes history. Closer analysis of the wound shows remarkable detail. Microfractures in the surrounding bone suggest the arrow struck with unusual force. Tissue around the entry point is compressed, indicating he was hit from behind and likely didn't see the attacker. This is not a careless shot, it's a calculated strike. Whoever fired it knew anatomy well enough to incapacitate a grown man in minutes. And another quirky detail: chemical analysis of the flint shows trace elements indicating it was quarried locally, not from some distant trade network like the copper axe. So while Ötzi carried exotic metals across valleys, the arrow was homegrown. A local enemy perhaps, not a stranger from afar. It's almost poetic. He survives the long reach of trade and travel, only to fall to a nearby hand, intimate and precise. You notice the subtle angle of entry, the slight twist that implies the arrow rotated as it hit, maximizing damage. His hand wound, likely defensive, adds context. He tried to grab, parry, survive. Every line in his flesh is a sentence in the final story, and the arrow is the period that ends it. Historians still debate whether multiple attackers were involved. Some suggest a struggle, others argue for a single assailant. Either way, the arrow's path confirms one chilling fact. Ötzi's end was not natural, not accidental. It was a violent intervention, a collision between human intent and human frailty, captured forever in ice. You step back, imagining that ridge in the alpine wind, picturing him falling, the arrow fixed in him, the world suddenly quieter, colder, waiting for millennia. The deadly path of the arrow isn't just a wound, it's the final punctuation in a story of survival, trust, betrayal, and enduring mystery. You crouch lower in the alpine snow, letting your eyes linger on Ötzi's right hand. And you notice something that turns the story from tragic to intensely personal. The deep cut across his palm. It's small, but deliberate. A mark of struggle. A silent witness to the last moments of a man who fought. Maybe desperately, maybe futilely. That hand wound is more than injury. It's an echo of a fight frozen in ice. A tattoo of survival instinct written in blood. Mainstream fact. Forensic analysis shows that the cut is consistent with a sharp object, probably a flint blade or dagger. The wound is on his right hand, indicating defensive action. He may have raised it instinctively to shield himself. Or perhaps he tried to grab the arrow or fight back. It aligns with other trauma on his body, suggesting a struggle before death, rather than a sudden, singular strike. Quirky detail. Microscopic examination revealed tiny flakes of flint embedded in the wound, suggesting the attacker's weapon was poorly hafted or chipped during the encounter. In other words, Ötzi may have left behind microscopic souvenirs of his final duel. Imagine that, 5,000 years later, scientists finding fragments of a foe's weapon lodged in your hand. It's like a prehistoric, take this with you, gift, forever preserved in ice. Historians still argue about the sequence of injuries. Did Ötzi's hand cut occur before the arrow struck, as part of a desperate defense? Or after, perhaps, as he grappled with his attacker on the snowy ground? The order changes the narrative of his last moments. Was he running, fighting off someone in pursuit, or already pinned when he tried to resist? Either scenario paints a vivid, perilous, alpine scene. Picture it. Snow swirls in the wind, icy crystals stinging exposed skin, breath turning to vapor in frigid air. Ötzi's hand jerks instinctively as a blade flashes. Pain blooms sharp, white-hot, and instinct overrides reason. He doesn't have time to think about the arrow yet. Just survival. Each cut, each twist, each grasp is an immediate, primal calculation. Stay alive. His copper axe rattles at his side. Unfinished arrows bounce in his quiver, and every muscle in his body tenses against the inevitable. Closer study shows tiny abrasions around the wound, indicating repeated contact, possibly a struggle over a weapon. He wasn't just stabbed once. He wrestled, pushed, twisted. The hand wound is an intimate record of his resistance, a small battlefield etched in flesh, preserved by snow and ice. And in a macabre twist of irony, the hand that once gripped his axe, adjusted his clothing, or held food, now bears the scars of a confrontation frozen for millennia. Another quirky observation: pollen grains found in the wound suggest that some of the fight occurred near alpine flora, possibly bracken or moss, hinting that the attackers were in close contact with the same terrain. It's as if the mountain itself left fingerprints, a botanical breadcrumb trail embedded in human conflict. You imagine Ötzi grappling with his foe among tufts of grass and lichen, wind tearing at hair and clothing. The world narrowed to the pain in his palm. Historians debate whether the handcut implies a one-on-one skirmish or a chaotic encounter with multiple assailants. Some say the blade marks indicate personal revenge, a precise, targeted strike, while others argue it might be part of a larger confrontation, a violent clash with more than one antagonist. Either way, the wound transforms him from a distant archaeological specimen into a man reacting, fighting, and alive in those final moments. You lean back, imagining him slumping against a stone, blood trailing across snow, each breath ragged. That hand wound whispers of resistance, of instinct, and of a human unwilling to surrender quietly. The arrow was fatal, yes, but the cut tells a more intimate story. He tried, in the midst of cold, wind, and betrayal, to claw back some measure of control before the mountains claimed him. You step back from the intimate wounds and the frozen tableau and take a moment to imagine Ötzi not as a corpse, but as a living man in his final days. The arrow, the hand cut, the weathered clothing, they're clues, yes, but they also hint at a vibrant life, a rhythm of survival, work, and community just before the mountains swallowed him. Life before death, 5 millennia ago, was raw, tactile, and relentless. Mainstream fact: analysis of Ötzi's stomach and intestines reveals a diet of wild game like ibex and red deer, along with einkorn wheat and bracken. He wasn't just hunting for sport, he was provisioning for survival, carefully balancing energy needs with seasonal availability. His meals suggest knowledge of the land and its cycles, a hunter attuned to the mountains and forests around him. Now, a quirky detail: pollen in his stomach indicates that he had eaten certain plants, not for nutrition, but possibly for medicinal purposes. Bitter bracken, for instance, has anti-parasitic properties. He might have been deliberately treating intestinal parasites, effectively self-medicating in the Copper Age. You almost picture him grimacing over a mouthful of bitter greens, thinking, better than a louse-infested belly, I suppose. Historians still argue about what his lifestyle tells us about his social standing. Was he an ordinary hunter-gatherer or someone of status in his community? The presence of a copper axe, finely fletched arrows, and high-quality clothing suggests he was more than a casual wanderer. Yet he carries unfinished arrows and basic leather clothing, implying practicality and perhaps self-reliance rather than outright wealth. Picture him trekking across alpine valleys, early morning frost biting at his fingers, breath clouding in the cold. His clothing, layers of tanned hides, grass-lined shoes, and stitched leggings, insulates him, yet every step crunches on frost-hardened ground. He adjusts his quiver, checking the fletching on each arrow, tests the sharpness of his copper blade, and scans the ridges for game or danger. Every movement is deliberate, honed by experience. Every choice a negotiation with risk and necessity. Closer examination of his belongings shows evidence of repair. Leather patched with sinew, tools sharpened repeatedly, even his cloak bearing traces of long use. Ötzi didn't have a blacksmith or tailor. He maintained his possessions himself, crafting a life of survival that required skill, patience, and resilience. His hands, scarred and calloused, bear witness to labor, hunting, butchering, sewing, climbing, enduring. Quirky detail again. His tattoos may also reflect health management. Infrared scans show lines placed over joints, possibly as a primitive form of acupuncture or pain relief for arthritis. It's a hint that life before death wasn't just about survival. It was also about understanding one's own body, experimenting with remedies, trying to extend function in a world without pharmacies. Imagine him pausing by a rocky outcrop, rubbing soot into his skin, muttering about stiff knees, silently inventing Copper Age physiotherapy. Historians debate how mobile he really was. Some argue that his diet, clothing, and tool quality imply extensive travel and interaction with multiple communities, suggesting a man who was both skilled and socially connected. Others contend he may have been more localized, traveling shorter distances, but carrying traded goods, like the southern Tuscan copper axe, through infrequent but meaningful exchanges. Either way, he is a man fully engaged with his environment and social networks. You imagine Ötzi at night, firelight flickering against a cave wall or rock overhang, warming his hands, inspecting his arrow fletching, listening to distant predators, wind whistling through the ridges. He eats simply, sleeps lightly, and dreams, if humans then could dream the way we do now, of surviving tomorrow, of the hunt, of his people. Life before death is mundane, harsh, and yet, in its rhythm, entirely human. Every scar, every patch, every meal, every tattoo tells a story of that existence. Before the arrow, before the frost, before the glacier became his grave, Ötzi moved through the Alps with purpose. He breathed, hunted, mended, and endured. And as you follow his journey, you see that these final moments of living are as significant as the circumstances of his death, because they are proof that even in a world so distant, life was rich, tactile, and profoundly human. You pause for a moment, letting the alpine wind whisper in your ears, and you realize that Ötzi's story isn't just about survival. It's about conflict, about enemies whose presence lingers like shadows on the snow. That arrow in his back, the hand wound, the bruised body, they are all reminders that human history is not peaceful, even in a world dominated by mountains and wildlife. The Alps, pristine as they seem, were also a stage for human rivalry, and Ötzi's last journey was a silent battle frozen in ice. Mainstream fact. Forensic analysis confirms that the arrow entered his body at close range, from behind, suggesting an ambush. His hand wound indicates defensive action, possibly grabbing at the attacker or attempting to parry a blow. The combined injuries tell a story of confrontation, not accident, and they have allowed researchers to reconstruct a violent final encounter. Quirky detail. Microscopic traces of blood on his clothing belong to at least 4 other individuals. That's right. His kit, cloak, and quiver contain genetic fingerprints of others, suggesting either a struggle with multiple people or that he carried items previously touched by friends, foes, or both. You almost imagine the glacier as a crime scene, where every particle of DNA tells a different story, whispering secrets across millennia. Historians still argue whether these enemies were rivals, revenge seekers, or members of his own community. Was this a targeted attack, the culmination of a feud over territory, resources, or status? Or was he simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught by opportunistic hunters, familiar with the mountain trails? The answer changes the narrative entirely. Either a personal vendetta or a tragic encounter with chance. Picture the scene. Ötzi stumbles across a ridge, snow crunching beneath boots, quiver rattling. He senses movement, glances back, too late. The arrow's whistling flight ends in flesh. His hand jerks, grasping the air, finding a branch, a blade, anything to resist. The struggle is brief, chaotic, instinctive. Wind bites at exposed skin. Adrenaline floods muscles. And yet, the Alps themselves remain indifferent, silent witnesses to a fleeting human drama. Closer examination reveals subtle clues in the injuries. The angle of the arrow, the defensive hand cut, bruises along his shoulders, they indicate a close-range fight. Ötzi was not attacked from afar. Someone was within reach. Personal, deliberate. It's a confrontation marked by proximity, by intent, by the stark immediacy of mortal danger. Another quirky detail, analysis of his stomach and intestines shows that he had recently eaten ibex, red deer, and wild grains. This timing suggests he may have been traveling after a meal, perhaps slowing him down just enough for attackers to take advantage. Historians can't prove causation, but it's a hauntingly human detail. Hunger, sustenance, and survival intersecting with fatal misfortune. Historians debate whether the presence of multiple blood traces indicates companions helping him or assailants in pursuit. One camp argues he was aided by friends who left traces unintentionally during the struggle. Another suggests that the blood belongs to attackers, marking a violent confrontation with several opponents. Either interpretation adds layers to the story of his final hours, highlighting the uncertainty inherent in reconstructing events frozen in ice. Imagine standing there, following every detail with your mind's eye. Footprints in snow, struggle marks on rocks, flakes of blood mingled with ice crystals. The mountains reclaim everything quickly, erasing the scene over decades, centuries. All that remains is the body, the arrow, the axe, and the whispers of enemies remembered, not just as people, but as forces shaping his final fate. And yet, despite this evidence, the Alps remain neutral. They neither condemn nor comfort. They simply preserve. Ötzi's body, locked in ice, is the archive of human conflict, and through it, the enemies live on, not as fully realized individuals, but as echoes in the snow, reminders that even 5 millennia ago, life and death were entangled with human rivalry and sudden violence. You step back from the scattered clues of conflict and take in the wider scene, the lonely ridge where Ötzi finally gave in to the mountain. He didn't die surrounded by friends or family. He didn't slump beside a fire or in a communal shelter. Instead, his end came in solitude, cold, slicing through every layer of hide and leather, snow crunching beneath a body that had fought so hard to live. The loneliness of his final moments hangs in the air, palpable, like the alpine wind itself. Mainstream fact. Ötzi's body was discovered in a glacial crevice, curled slightly, face turned downward, arms close to his chest, a posture suggesting he fell where he was attacked and was quickly enveloped by snow and ice. This natural preservation is what allowed modern science to study him so extensively, but it also underscores the isolation of his death. He was entirely alone, unassisted, and at the mercy of the mountain. Quirky detail. Analysis of his gut bacteria suggests that even in life, Ötzi experienced long periods of solitude. His microbiome shows signs of stress, limited social contact, and diet consistency that implies extended travel without communal support. Imagine him trudging across alpine passes, eating ibex jerky and foraged plants, thinking to himself, "Great, no one around to share a fire again." Even 5,000 years ago, the introvert in him might have sighed. Historians still argue about whether he intended to seek refuge in the mountains or was simply fleeing pursuers. Some suggest he may have chosen isolation as a survival strategy, taking high alpine routes where few humans would follow, hoping the thin air and snow would act as natural defenses. Others contend that his choice was less calculated, a combination of desperation and circumstance, leaving him vulnerable to attack. Either way, the result was the same: death in utter solitude. Picture it: wind whipping over jagged rocks, snowdrifts forming silent curtains around him. He collapses, the arrow in his back, hand cut, muscles screaming in shock and pain. He adjusts his clothing, tries to breathe through the cold, perhaps mutters an unintelligible curse or thought. There's no one to help, no voice to call, only the mountain, indifferent and eternal. Each breath, ragged and shallow, becomes a countdown, a series of small defeats. Closer examination reveals subtle signs of his struggle even after the fatal strike. Bruises indicate he may have rolled or crawled, trying to escape further harm. Broken twigs and disturbed snow around his body suggest last-minute movements, perhaps an attempt to grasp a rock or push against the slope. The body records an alpine struggle, etched in flesh, ice, and gravity. Another quirky note: pollen trapped in his hair suggests he may have brushed against plants, bracken, and alpine shrubs in his last moments. Even in death, the environment leaves its mark, tiny, silent witnesses to his final motions. You almost hear a whispered alpine commentary. He passed here, touched this leaf, took his last breath here. The mountains remember everything, even the smallest gestures. Historians debate whether the loneliness of his death was typical or exceptional. Some argue that high-altitude travel was inherently solitary, so Ötzi's fate might reflect normal Copper Age movement patterns. Others contend that most hunters traveled with companions, implying that his isolation was unusual, possibly resulting from a targeted flight or unique circumstance. The debate adds mystery to his last hours. Was he an outlier, or simply following a path many would have walked? You picture the ridge, silent now, the sun low, shadows stretching across ice and stone. The arrow, the axe, the cuts and bruises, each a punctuation in the story of a solitary end. Ötzi's death is more than a historical event. It's a meditation on human fragility, on the endurance of life, and on the quiet inevitability of mortality in a world indifferent to struggle. And yet, in the middle of that isolation, there's a strange poetry. The mountain keeps him, the snow cradles him, the ice preserves him. His loneliness becomes eternal companionship with the earth itself, a stark but serene afterlife, where no one disturbs, no one judges, and no one interrupts the final frost. You take a slow breath, imagining the glacier as both cradle and witness, and realize that Ötzi's story didn't end with his lonely death. Instead, the discovery in 1991 sparked a rebirth of legends, research, and curiosity. The Alps, silent for 5 millennia, suddenly echoed with questions, theories, and reconstructions. He became more than a mummy. He became a symbol, a bridge between prehistoric life and modern fascination. Mainstream fact: after his discovery, Ötzi was meticulously studied and eventually placed in a climate-controlled exhibit in Bolzano, Italy, where scientists could continue research while the public glimpsed a real human from the Copper Age. His preserved body, tools, clothing, and tattoos have since provided unmatched insight into 5,000-year-old European life. Museums, documentaries, and forensic studies have all contributed to a widespread public and academic engagement. Quirky detail: almost immediately, Ötzi inspired pop culture in unexpected ways, from comic books and animated films to novelty t-shirts and mascots. He became a recognizable figure beyond academia. One scientist joked that his fame rivaled any rock star, 5,000 years posthumously. Imagine a man who never knew fire like ours, suddenly becoming a celebrity in the era of social media and memes. His frozen face graces everything from textbooks to tourist souvenirs. Historians still argue whether the global fascination with Ötzi skews our understanding of the Copper Age. Some suggest that the media focus on his murder, arrow, and mysterious death overshadows broader social and cultural contexts. Others argue that his fame serves as a gateway to learning about ancient life, technology, and human adaptability. Either way, the glacier speaks now, not just through ice, but through the voices of scholars, storytellers, and curious minds worldwide. Picture the scene: researchers in white coats, gloves meticulously handling his clothes, scanning every inch, while cameras capture the details for documentaries. A flurry of questions swirls. Who attacked him? Why the arrow? Were the tattoos therapeutic? How far did he travel? Each answer leads to more questions, and each theory revives the mystery of life, death, and human behavior. Ötzi becomes simultaneously a case study, a celebrity, and a touchstone for human curiosity. Closer examination shows the subtle human touches in the study process. Scientists debate interpretation, often using 3D models to reconstruct injuries, virtual simulations to track movements, and isotopic analysis to trace his diet and migration. It's almost as if he continues to teach, his body a silent professor, lecturing across the millennia. And yet, his presence is never passive. The glacier's cold holds him still, a reminder of the delicate balance between preservation and exposure. Another quirky tidbit: modern facial reconstructions have allowed children to meet Ötzi in interactive museum exhibits. Kids can touch replicas of his tools, try on virtual versions of his clothing, and even track his last journey through simulated alpine terrain. He has become a teaching tool and a historical companion, his image bridging millennia in ways even his original community could never have imagined. Historians debate whether his fame represents authentic engagement with the past or a sensationalized fixation on violence. The arrow, the wounds, the tattoos, these elements capture attention, but do they skew understanding? Some argue that we risk turning a human life into spectacle, while others see it as inspiration for deepening scientific inquiry. The glacier, silent for centuries, now speaks in dual voices, the whispers of the ice and the roar of human fascination. You imagine standing at the exhibit, seeing Ötzi behind glass, stillness preserved by frost and human care. His copper axe gleams under controlled lighting. The quiver of arrows remains meticulously arranged, and even the tattoos on his shoulder catch the light, telling their silent stories. Modern eyes marvel at his survival, his final moments, and the journey his body has taken, from a lonely ridge to global attention. And in this rebirth, there's a strange resonance. Ötzi is gone, yet everywhere at once, in textbooks, DNA labs, museum halls, and minds of curious onlookers. His story, frozen in ice, now ripples across time. Legends are reborn, not through myth alone, but through observation, analysis, and imagination. The glacier no longer just preserves, it speaks, sings, and invites humans to listen. You step back from the public exhibitions and the glacier's quiet voice and notice another kind of drama unfolding, not in snow or stone, but in labs, lecture halls, and journals. Ötzi has become the center of intense scholarly debate, a battlefield where theories clash almost as fiercely as the arrow once struck him. Science awakens curiosity, but human minds add their own twists, interpretations, rivalries, and disagreements that echo the conflicts frozen in ice. Mainstream fact. Researchers have argued over nearly every aspect of Ötzi's life and death. Was he a high-status individual, indicated by his copper axe, or simply a skilled hunter? Did his tattoos serve as therapeutic marks for chronic pain, or were they symbolic? Were the injuries inflicted in a personal vendetta, a random ambush, or an organized attack? Nearly every discovery sparks multiple hypotheses, and the debates often persist for decades. Quirky detail. One team of researchers claimed that Ötzi had a rare genetic mutation, suggesting predisposition to heart disease, while another argued that such analysis was inconclusive due to degradation over time. Conferences erupted with spirited discussion, and some scientists jokingly referred to the debates as Copper Age Wars. You can almost imagine a lecture hall where passionate archaeologists are waving replica arrows, pointing at scans, and debating whether Ötzi was unlucky, targeted, or just an ordinary hiker of prehistory. Historians still argue whether the focus on his death overshadows insights into his daily life. Some contend that the sensationalized mystery of the arrow and ambush distracts from the rich evidence of diet, technology, and mobility. Others suggest that the dramatic elements serve as entry points, drawing attention to the mundane yet remarkable aspects of Copper Age existence. the balance between intrigue and scholarship remains delicate. Picture the scene in the lab. CT scans flicker on monitors. 3D models rotate in midair. Isotope ratios illuminate dietary reconstructions. Scientists debate posture, wound sequencing, arrow trajectory, and microbiome composition. Heated exchanges occur over seemingly minor details. Was the wound angle 30 degrees or 33? Did the stomach content indicate a morning meal or the previous night's feast? Every micro detail becomes a potential insight, a potential flashpoint in the ongoing battle of ideas. Closer analysis even extends to his tattoos. Some researchers insist the marks correspond to acupuncture points, suggesting prehistoric medical knowledge. Others argue the placement was decorative, cultural, or ritualistic. Infrared imaging, once revolutionary, has now become a tool in fierce scholarly skirmishes, revealing every line and sparking renewed debate about the intersection of healing, belief, and art in Ötzi's time. Another quirky observation: some researchers playfully proposed that Ötzi might have been a Copper Age introvert, given the isolation implied by his microbiome and travel patterns. It's a humorous way to humanize him, but it also illustrates how far modern imagination stretches to fill gaps left by millennia. Scholars, like detectives, try to piece together his personality, motivations, and choices, all from frozen remains and artifacts. Historians debate whether modern interpretations impose contemporary biases on ancient life. Is reading social hierarchy, medical knowledge, or personal relationships into his tools and wounds projecting our modern lens? Or is it legitimate inference? The controversy underscores a critical tension: the pursuit of understanding versus the humility required when reconstructing lives from fragments. You stand metaphorically in the lab, watching every scan, every analysis, every debate unfold. The glacier may have preserved him, but scholars animate him, giving life to questions, hypotheses, and rivalries that echo across time. In a way, Ötzi's legacy is not only in the arrow, the axe, or the tattoos. It's in the spirited, ongoing human conversation about who he was, how he lived, and why he died. And in the midst of these scholar wars, you realize that even millennia later, Ötzi continues to provoke curiosity, debate, and fascination. His life, frozen and analyzed, has become an enduring catalyst, showing that the mysteries of the past are never truly silent. They fight back in laboratories, lectures, and journals, demanding interpretation, imagination, and respect. You take a final look at the glacier, letting the cold seep into your bones as you imagine Ötzi lying still, preserved yet alive in every scan, every fiber, every flake of pollen, echoes in ice. That's what he has become. Not just a body, not just a corpse or artifact, but a resonant presence, whispering across 5,000 years. His story is stitched into the fabric of the Alps, in the copper of his axe, the flint of his arrow, the stitches of his clothing, and even in the silent arc of his tattoos. Mainstream fact: Ötzi remains the oldest natural human mummy in Europe, giving researchers unprecedented insight into Copper Age life, from diet to disease, from mobility to social networks. Every aspect of his existence can be reconstructed, analyzed, and debated. His preservation has turned mountains of ice into a chronicle of human experience, waiting for modern eyes to read. Quirky detail, even his lice, traced from hair and clothing, offer fascinating microhistory. Scientists discovered that these tiny parasites carry genetic clues that map human migration and evolution. In a strange way, Ötzi's blood-sucking companions are fellow historians, tiny archivists, preserving the story of humanity in their DNA. Imagine that, a man dead for millennia, teaching us about our own species through insects he never knew existed. Historians still argue about the broader lessons his life and death provide. Does Ötzi represent the average Copper-Age human, or was he exceptional, more mobile, better equipped, or socially elevated? Can we extrapolate patterns of diet, technology, and social behavior from one preserved individual? Or does his singularity distort our understanding? The debates continue, echoing as persistently as the glaciers themselves. You picture him climbing the alpine ridges, tools strapped to his body, wind slicing at his cheeks, aware of every footfall, of every shadow. You can almost hear the faint echo of footsteps on ice, the whisper of arrows through the air, the crunch of snow beneath boots long gone. The mountain remembers, and in remembering, it speaks, letting you reconstruct a life, a journey, a last struggle, and a profound stillness. Closer inspection of his possessions shows the interweaving of practicality and culture. The copper axe, the quiver of arrows, the carefully patched clothing, all indicate a life managed with skill, resourcefulness, and knowledge of the environment. Even the smallest details, like grass woven into his shoes for insulation or soot in his tattoos, tell you that Ötzi's life was intimate, considered, and human. Another quirky insight: CT scans reveal tiny abrasions on his teeth from stone particles in bread or grain. He literally ate history. Each bite, each meal, is a breadcrumb, leading you closer to understanding daily life in the Copper Age. It's almost poetic. Teeth as archivists, recording the minutiae of survival in the high Alps, preserved for millennia. Historians debate whether his death was a personal vendetta, a random attack, or a consequence of broader social dynamics. The arrow, the hand wound, the bruises, all are evidence, but interpretation varies. Was Ötzi unlucky or caught in the crossfire of a larger conflict? We may never know, and perhaps that uncertainty is part of his enduring mystique. As you linger, it becomes clear that the ice doesn't just preserve, it converses. Ötzi's body, belongings, and wounds speak across time. They challenge you to imagine life in the Copper Age, to wonder about human behavior, to marvel at resilience, and to feel the intimacy of survival. Every tattoo, arrow, and tool is a voice, and together they form a chorus echoing across millennia. And now, 5,000 years later, his echoes shape not only scientific inquiry, but imagination, culture, and identity. Museums, labs, and classrooms continue to learn from him. Children touch replicas. Researchers debate fiercely, and curious minds like yours trace his journey in the Alps. Ötzi teaches persistence, adaptation, and human complexity in ways that are both intimate and universal. Finally, As you step away from the glacier, you feel a strange kinship with him. The echoes in ice are more than history. They are a reminder of survival, curiosity, conflict, and wonder. He has endured beyond death, inspiring generations to observe, question, and marvel. And through the ice, through science, through imagination, he whispers still. Now, as the story drifts toward its close, take a deep, slow breath. Feel the cold of the alpine wind brushing your cheeks, the crunch of snow beneath imagined boots, the eerie stillness of ice that has held a man for 5 millennia. Ötzi's story is not merely a tale of death, but a meditation on life, survival, and the traces we leave behind. You can almost hear the whisper of his footsteps in the glacier, a faint echo that stretches across centuries. Think about the copper axe, the arrow, the hand cut, the tattoos, and even the lice. They are more than artifacts. They are the fragments of a lived, breathing human experience. They remind you that each life, no matter how distant, holds complexity, struggle, and resilience. Modern science may uncover DNA, diet, and disease, but it cannot recreate the pulse of his final breath, the rush of the mountain wind, the ache of muscles over rugged terrain, and maybe that's the beauty of it, the blend of knowledge and mystery, fact and imagination. Let your mind wander along the alpine ridges, past jagged rocks and snow-drifted valleys. Imagine the sun, low on the horizon, casting long shadows, and Ötzi moving silently, alive in your thoughts. Consider the lives of those around him, the unseen companions or enemies, the paths crossed and choices made. Reflect on the fragility and tenacity of life, on the endless curiosity that drives humans to seek understanding, even across millennia. As you exhale, feel the echo of his story settle softly, like snowflakes landing quietly on a glacier. The arrow, the axe, the tattoos, the winds of the Alps, they all speak. And in listening, you carry a part of Ötzi's journey with you, a meditation on humanity's endurance, mystery, and wonder. Sweet dreams.